Barakatah Yahweh Shah. Barakatah Yahweh. Barakatah Yahweh. Barakatah Yahweh Shah.
My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father which gave them me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand.
Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Recha Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. Alright, this is going to be a continuation, alright, of Daniel, the 11th chapter. Last time we left off at verse 9. Alright, so today we're going to go into pretty much verses 10 and 11. Alright, cover the secular history behind that. But alright, just a quick recap, okay, from the beginning. Alright, Daniel 11 and 1. So basically, it starts as it starts in the time of Darius the Mede. Okay, and then it says here, alright, Daniel was told, okay, that afterwards there's gonna come 3 kings in Persia. There's gonna stand up 3 kings in Persia. Alright, which these kings started with Cambyses II. Alright, and then Bardia or Smerdis, followed by Darius the Great. Okay, which he was a Persian, different from the Darius the Mede in verse 1. Alright, then it talks about a 4th king, alright, who's going to be far richer than all of them, alright, which is Xerxes, alright, or Ahasuerus, which we read about in the book of Esther. Okay, it goes in, verse 3 goes into Alexander, alright, which is that mighty king, okay, which is Alexander the Greek. He stood up, he became the first king of Grecia, conquered all this land, alright, and then verse 4 goes into, after conquering all this land and reaching, the epic of his kingdom, he basically dies, that's what it means by his kingdom being broken. All right, he dies and his kingdom gets divided, all right, amongst his generals, okay, which, all right, through that division, all right, it says here, it shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, meaning not to his direct, descendants. Now, I know I'm going through it kind of fast, Barry, because I've already done videos on this, so Lord willing, I'll put it together in a playlist, and then you can have easier access to it. Okay, but you can go back and watch those for more in depth on it. All right, it says, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, because each of those generals ruled according to how they wanted to rule. All right, they weren't into pan-Hellenism as Alexander was trying to do. Okay, and then it goes down, verse 5, it talks about the king of the south, all right, which the first king of the south was Ptolemy the first Soter, all right, and one of his princes was referring on to Seleucus Nicator. Okay, going down, now verse 6, all right, is going into when, now you're done with, Alexander, all right, the wars between the generals, all right, you finally have the last remaining generals which have divided up his kingdom, and in here, all right, you have the war, all right, the 6 Syrian wars, which takes place between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. Okay, so in verse 6, this is at the end, all right, I believe of the first Syrian war, which I have the Syrian wars here, all right, which we can always refer to. Okay, so it's the second, all right, yep. So in Daniel 11 and 6, all right, is referring to the end of the second Syrian war, all right, where, Ptolemy the second Philadelphus and Antiochus the second Theos, they basically form a treaty through marriage. All right, so Ptolemy brings his daughter Berenice, marries Antiochus as an agreement, through marriage. Okay, now this agreement ultimately fails, and Antiochus, in order to marry, all right, Berenice, he had to first leave his first wife. So he ends up trying to go back to her. It's a whole lot of drama. He gets killed, Berenice dies, and his ex-wife, her son, really becomes the next king. Okay, now Berenice's brother, which is what it goes into in verse 7, all right, a branch out of her roots. This is going into Berenice Berenice's brother, Ptolemy III. Okay, he comes up, finds out his sister is dead, and what does he do? He wages war, all right, on the king at the time, which was Seleucus II. Okay, and as it says here, and shall prevail, meaning he won that war. All right, and when he won, he brought back, you know, the different idols and gold and precious vessels. All right, he brought it back to Egypt. So now going to verse 10. Okay, this is after all of that has transpired. Okay, after the third Syrian war, you have Seleucus II, Callinicus. All right, he was the one who Ptolemy III had waged war on. All right, and you know, basically Seleucus lost. Okay, so now upon the death of Seleucus II, all right, it says here, before he could launch his invasion, Seleucus died unexpectedly in 225 BC as the result of a fall from his horse. He was succeeded firstly by his eldest son, Alexander, who took the name Seleucus III, Cyrannus, and later by a younger son, Antiochus III the Great. Now, Antiochus III the Great, as we read more into the chapter, okay, he's gonna come up, he's gonna come up again. Okay, so these were the two sons, all right, that basically took over after Seleucus II's death, and that's what we're going into in Daniel 11 and 10. It says, "But his sons shall be stirred up." Okay, now when you look up the word stirred, all right, it says here, gara. It says to cause strife, contend. It says here to excite oneself against foe, wage war. All right, and when you go to Proverbs 21 and 1, all right, it says that let me just get it real quick. And ultimately, we understand this was really the Lord, all right, having all this happen so that what prophecy could be fulfilled. Okay, because this was all prophesied. We're actually reading the prophecy. What we're doing is we're reading here in Daniel 11. This is the prophecy, all right, that Daniel is being given. That's why it says here, one shall. You know, it's speaking in future tense. Okay, and now when we read in the secular history, this has already happened. All right, we're reading the fulfillment, all right, of these prophecies. Okay, so when we read about, you know, the Syrian wars, like I have here, and this happened here, and this happened here, guess what? That has already happened. Okay, and it was prophesied as we're reading here in the book of Daniel, the 11th chapter. So this is pure validation for those who want to say, oh, it's the book is written by this. Guess what? When Daniel got this vision, that was long, hundreds of years before the what we're reading about here in the Syrian wars. Okay. But anyway, going back, this is Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1. It says, the king's heart, meaning what? His mind, is in the hand of Yahweh. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. Okay. And so that's what the Lord was doing between these kings. He was stirring up their minds to go to war with each other. All right. To fulfill prophecy. Okay. So Daniel 11 and 10 says, but his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Okay, now when you read this, as we're going to go into, the sons that were stirred up, all right, as we read, were the sons of Seleucus II Callinicus, all right, which was Seleucus III Cyrannus, all right, who his birth name was Alexander, all right, and his brother Antiochus III the Great. Okay, those were the two sons. All right, and it says, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come. Reason being, out of those two sons, or those two brothers, the older brother who had taken over first, all right, this guy, Seleucus III, he died. Okay, he died, you know, as we're going to read here. It says, Seleucus III Soter, called Seleucus Cyrannus, all right, which means thunderbolt, ruled December 225 BC, okay, to about April/June 223 BC, was the ruler of the Hellenistic Seleucid kingdom, the eldest son of Seleucus II, Callinicus, and Laodice II. All right, which, you know, there's not really much information on him because he didn't really do much. All right, or there's just not a lot of information on him because as he came into rulership, he died, what, 2 years? He reigned for about, what, 2 years? Okay. It says his birth name was Alexander, and he was named after his great uncle, the Seleucid official Alexander. Alexander changed his name to Seleucus after he succeeded his father as king. So you see, when you hear Antiochus and you hear Seleucus and you hear Darius and you hear Ptolemy, these aren't like their birth names. Okay, you could think of it sort of as throne names. Okay, it says and for some of them we have their actual birth names, for some of them we don't, so we refer to them as these titles. So it says here, after a brief reign of 3 years, okay, 3 years, during which he unsuccessfully continued his father's war in Asia Minor against Attalus I of Pergamon. It says Seleucus was assassinated in Anatolia by members of his army. His official byname Soter means savior, while his nickname Seranus means thunderbolt. So you have these two brothers, right? The sons that were stirred up, okay? But only one of them came. Why? Because the other one had died, like we just read. Okay, it says he was assassinated. So who was left to take over? His younger brother, Antiochus III the Great. Okay, so let's read here about Antiochus. It says, Antiochus III the Great was a Greek Hellenistic king and the sixth ruler of the Seleucid Empire. He ruled over the region of Syria and large parts of the rest of Western Asia towards the end of the 3rd century BC. Rising to the throne at the age of 18 in 222 BC, his early campaigns against the Ptolemaic kingdom were unsuccessful. But in the following years, Antiochus gained several military victories and substantially expanded the empire's territory. His traditional designation, the Great, reflects the epithet he assumed. He also assumed the title Basileus Megas, Greek for great king. All right, Megas meaning great, Basileus king. It says the traditional title of the Persian kings. A militarily active ruler, Antiochus restored much of the territory of the Seleucid Empire before suffering a serious setback toward the end of his reign in his war against Rome, which it also goes into that. All right, but we'll mention that when we get there. So we've read about Antiochus. We're not going to read everything about him, only the parts that are pertaining to the verses that we're in. All right, so the two sons were stirred up, okay, Seleucus III and Antiochus III. And it says, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. All right, and this was Antiochus III the Great, basically gathering his armies, okay, and getting ready to wage war, all right, on Ptolemy the Fourth Philopator. All right, waging war on the Ptolemaic Empire or Ptolemaic dynasty. Okay, so he literally came down. Now, when he came to basically Ptolemy's borders, okay, Ptolemy had no option but to go to war with him. You know, like Ptolemy the Fourth, Philopator. Some historians say that he wasn't, much of, getting into that war kind of thing. He liked to live a lascivious life. He liked to just, live in luxury. All right. So when you have Antiochus trying to wage war on you, he's like, he's pissed off, like, yo, what's this guy's deal? And he ends up going to war with him, which we're about to read here in verse 11. Okay, so verse 10 is dealing with the sons of Seleucus II, all right, which were Seleucus III, Seranus, and Antiochus III the Great, namely Antiochus III the Great, all right, because he is that one that comes over and goes to war with the king of the south here in verse 11. So it says, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler. Now, when you look up the word choler, all right, it says marar, it says to be bitter, to show bitterness, all right, to be enraged, okay? And also in Daniel, the 8th chapter, it says how the ram, the he-goat smote the ram, with choler, with bitterness. Okay, so it says the king of the south which the king of the south at the time was Ptolemy the fourth Philopator. All right, this right here, this Daniel 11 and 11 is dealing with the fourth Syrian war. Okay, so let's read it, and then we'll read the portion on it. So it says, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him. Who did he fight with? He fought, well, I was going to say it, even with the king of the north. And the king of the north at this time was Antiochus III the Great. So you have this war between Antiochus III and Ptolemy the fourth Philopator. All right, the fourth Syrian war. It says, and he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. Because as we're about to read, this battle, all right, which was called, I believe it was called the Battle of Raphia. All right. Yep, the Battle of Raphia, or Battle of Raphia, as it says here, was the largest battle since the Battle of Ipsus over 80 years earlier. Okay, so it was a very, very large battle. They all had brought a large or vast amount, of people in terms of their soldiers. Okay, that's why it mentions a great multitude being set forth. All right, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. The multitude was given into Ptolemy's hand because Ptolemy won that war. All right, he won the fourth Syrian war. Okay, so now let's read on that. When you go, you could just look this up. You look up Syrian wars. All right, it'll tell you, and you just come down to the fourth Syrian war. Now it says, upon taking the Seleucid throne in 223 BC, Antiochus III the Great set himself the task of restoring the lost imperial possessions of Seleucus I Nicator, which extended from Greco-Bactrian kingdom in the east, the Hellespont in the north, and Syria in the south. And that's the problem. All right, because Syria is contested. And guess what? While these kings are going to war over Syria, Koal Syria, which is Kal Syria, which is all Syria, guess who's getting affected as well? We are, because we're sort of in the middle of all of this. So when one dynasty or one empire has dominion, we're subject to them. Then the other comes and defeats them. Now we're subject to this king. Now this guy wants, okay, and then eventually it falls on Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's the one who just says, nah, I'm just going to cause hell upon these guys, which was also a prophecy. But anyway, back to the fourth Syrian war. It says here, by 221 BC, he had re-established Seleucid control over Media and Persia, which had been in rebellion. The ambitious king turned his eyes towards Syria and Egypt. Egypt had been significantly weakened by court intrigue and public unrest. The rule of the newly inaugurated Ptolemy IV Philopator began with the murder of Queen Mother Berenice II. The young king quickly fell under the absolute influence of imperial courtiers. His ministers used their absolute power in their own self-interest to the people's great chagrin, all right, or chagrin, which is displeasure. Because what's going on? The king is young, right? So you have these courtiers or these ministers who are like, yo, there's this friction going on, Everybody's trying to get their influence in there, at least while they can take advantage of this king's youth. All right. And this, like it says, it led to the people's displeasure. However, it says Antiochus sought to take advantage of this chaotic situation. So you have this public unrest going on, new king elected. He's young. Antiochus sees this and he says, yeah, I'm going to take advantage of this, So it says, after an invasion in 221 BC failed to launch, he finally began the fourth Syrian war in 219 BC. He recaptured Seleucia Pieria as well. All right, now just to get a visual on all of this, let's bring up Seleucia. All right, map. It's always good. I always say this. It's always good to pull up a map of what you're reading about so that you can get a better image in your head as to what's going on here. Okay. All right, let's see if we can get a good one. All right, so here's a good one. All right, it shows it right here. You have Seleucia Pieria, which is basically right here. All right, that little, I don't even know what to call that, but I'll show it right here. When you come up of north of Syria, okay, before you come down in here, it's right the territory around this area, okay, and they were going to war over that. So he takes that over, okay, in his conquest. Right, it says here he recaptured Seleucia Pieria as well. Now remember, he had to recapture it. Why? Because in the previous Syrian war, all right, which was between Antiochus III's father and Ptolemy III, Euergetes, the brother of the murdered Berenice, they went to war and Ptolemy won. So he had gained possession of this area as well, right? So now after that is all said and done, when this Antiochus III comes in and he's stirred up, you know, he has to retake over this area, all right, and then, you know, he has to make his way down into Syria, headed towards Egypt. Okay, so it says he recaptured Seleucia Pieria, as well as cities in Phoenicia, amongst them Tyre. Rather than promptly invading Egypt, Antiochus waited in Phoenicia for over a year, consolidating his new territories and listening to diplomatic proposals from the Ptolemaic kingdom. Meanwhile, Ptolemy's minister Ctesibius began recruiting and training an army. He recruited not only from the local Greek population, as Hellenistic armies generally were, but also from the native Egyptians. And this is why, going back, it mentions how this was it was basically a great battle, all right, with a large, two sides, large multitudes going right at each other. Because here on the Ptolemaic side, as we're reading, his army wasn't just Greeks. It wasn't just Edomites. They had the native Egyptians as well. So you got Hamites and Edomites. Okay. It says, let's see where we were. Okay. But also from the native Egyptians, enrolling at least 30,000 native Phalangites. This innovation paid off, but it would eventually have dire consequences for Ptolemaic stability. Why? Because, well, we're going to read it. It says, in the summer of 217 BC, Ptolemy engaged and defeated the long-delayed Antiochus in the Battle of Raphia, the largest battle since the Battle of Ipsus over 80 years earlier. That is right here, Daniel 11, the latter part. It says, I'll read it from the top. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler and come forth and fight with him. All right, we just read that here in 217. Ptolemy engaged and defeated the long-delayed Antiochus. Right, so they had the battle of Raphia. All right, it says, and fight with him. And fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And that was, as it says here, he defeated Antiochus in the battle of Raphia, right? So it says, Ptolemy's victory preserved his control over Coal Syria, and the weak king declined to advance further into Antiochus's empire, even to retake Seleucia Pieria. Now, this, as you know, later on we're gonna go into, is gonna come back to bite him in the ass. All right, it's not gonna benefit him, because instead of pursuing his enemy and taking over the land and doing all that, once again, he wasn't really interested in that. All right, he just came out and said, look, get this guy out of here, defeat him, let him go somewhere and do something with himself, and just leave me alone. Let me go back to what I'm doing. All right, so that gave Antiochus a chance to retreat. All right, and eventually he would come back. So it says, the Ptolemaic kingdom would continue to weaken over the following years, suffering from economic problems and rebellion. Nationalist sentiment had developed among the native Egyptians who had fought at Raphia, right? Because now they fought in the war and they started feeling nationalistic, and they remembered, hold up, we're being ruled over by Edomites. All right, so you had rebellions taking place. It says, confident and well-trained, they broke from Ptolemy in what is known as the Egyptian Revolt, establishing their own kingdom in Upper Egypt, which the Ptolemies finally reconquered around 185 BC. All right, and that was basically, that's Daniel 11 and 11. Now, what you can do, if you're interested, you want more details, you can just always click on Battle of Raphia, and it'll go into more details, all right, as to, what was happening in the battle, the aftermath of the battle, and so on and so forth. All right. Yeah, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, yeah. All right. So I'll save that for the next time. All right. So Daniel 11 and 10 going into the two sons, and then, that one who came was Antiochus the third. 11, he goes to war with Ptolemy the fourth, Philopator, and he loses that war. Okay. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to stop it here. All right. Lord willing, this was edifying and informative to the elect. I know it's a lot of information, but hey, to those who are interested, it'll give you a more understanding behind the precepts you're reading. Okay. But with that, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rakha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.